I'm Andrew Patterson from interest.co.nz. Welcome to another in our business success stories. Today I'm with Jeff Ross, the Chief Executive of Moa Brewery. Hi there, Jeff.
Hi, how are you?
Jeff, just tell us a little bit about the history of Moa and how it came about, and particularly how it got its name.
It came about because Josh Scott, son of Alan Scott, the winemaker, was doing his winemaking apprenticeship offshore. And a lot of the winemakers, particularly in the Napa Valley, were actually making beer. So after a hard day's harvest, they could have a cold beer and a quality cold beer. Josh came back to New Zealand, started doing the same in Marlborough for the vintners there. He didn't have a name for his brand. It was growing in Marlborough. And at the same time, he happened to discover that there were some archaeologists down the end of his road digging up some Moa bones. One hot Friday afternoon, he took them some of his beer, and that's where the name came from. And that was in 2003, so that was the early days of Moa.
It's about as quintessential New Zealand story as it gets, isn't it?
It is. But he had a vision. He lives right next door to Cloudy Bay, and he came back. He saw some great craft beers in the US, like Sierra Nevada and beers like that. And he believed that he could create a beer from New Zealand that was the equivalent of Cloudy Bay and wine, and that Moa and its identity and its name and its provenance and origin and the quality, the actual beer making methodology itself could be the foundation for a global beer brand from New Zealand. And I think he's right. He was a pioneer in craft beer in New Zealand.
When you go into a lot of supermarket aisles now, the beer aisle almost takes up a complete aisle. This is an extremely crowded space. So how does a niche brand like Moa stand out in that category?
Yeah, look, there is a lot of development going on there, and what supermarkets are realising is that they can actually make the same from selling one bottle of craft beer as they can for a dozen packed up as a pallet at kind of the end of the aisle. So they're really interested in this space. It's been driven by them. It's been driven by consumers who want quality over quantity, and I think consumers discovering that there's more to life in beer than just an ale or a lager. Just like 20 years ago, we realised in wine there's more than just red or white. So that change in popular culture is happening. It's relatively crowded. However, particularly offshore, there's no real New Zealand brand. So there's a few craft beers growing quite well here in New Zealand. The challenge to get that established in global markets will come from capital, skill to execute offshore, distribution, branding, understanding how to reach consumers, grow consumer loyalty. So all those skills will be the critical factor to get a decent chunk of market share.
As a niche brewer, though, you do run a little bit of risk that you alienate all of these Moa brewer drinkers who like just having it as a quiet little brand that sits on the back, but everybody's going to be drinking it now. So how do you deal with that?
Well, there is a wee bit of a risk, and I hope we don't do that. I think you mitigate that risk by being true to your founding principles. You don't start cutting corners. You keep brewing in Marlborough. You keep brewing the same way. So that's step one. Step two is I think people are starting to realise that you can become a craft beer and actually be really big. So there's plenty of examples in the US of craft brewers, craft breweries that are actually now bigger than Lion and DB combined. They're huge businesses, but they're still viewed as craft because of the quality methodology.
You've chosen to go down the IPO route. Why that decision when there's plenty of cheap capital around at the moment and perhaps other funding options?
Well, it gives us a reasonable chunk of capital. There's some impatience in our side for some fast growth, and that requires a reasonable chunk of capital, which an IPO does allow you to do. We're raising 16 in total. 6 of that's going to build a new brewery. I mean, we need more capacity. If we could make more beer right now, we'd be selling more beer right now. So we need a decent chunk of capital for the IPO. But two benefits of listing that many people often forget about is one is credibility. So if we're talking to a distributor in the US, we rock up and we say we're listed on the New Zealand Exchange, all of a sudden we go from being seen potentially as two guys out of the garage to actually this is a proper organisation. We better get the president in for this meeting. We better take these guys seriously. So it helps from that point of view. And secondly, it raises your profile, particularly here in New Zealand with consumers.
course, Jeff, you've always been something of a risk taker. So you're taking risk at the moment when others are being very risk averse. So why are we seeing that happening? What are you seeing that perhaps others aren't?
Well, there may be some risk adversity at the moment. I guess what we focus on is our particular little part of the world, and our little particular part of the world is probably we tend to ignore things like Spain or the slowing of growth in China. What we focus on is the people we're speaking to in the US wanting high-end super premium beer with Marlborough New Zealand credentials, and are we getting great uptake? And the answer is yes. Do we think craft beer is going to grow in New Zealand and Australia? Yes. Do we see the ability to export a beer around the world with a long shelf life, which previously you couldn't do because of our bottle conditioning? We can. So we focus on those things. That gives us confidence that in the business model, and that's why we've pulled the trigger on this listing.
So where do the risks lie for a brand like Moa?
The only real risk for us is we don't grow as fast as we think we can grow. But we've done a huge amount of work to make sure that's not the case. We're very wary in the public environment that if you give the public a number, you gotta hit it. So we're very conscious of that. But that is kind of drives us and keeps us awake sometimes.
Are you mindful, though, that you've set this high benchmark for yourself after 42 below, and there's an expectation that you'll just re-deliver that performance second time round?
I'm probably more mindful that we don't want to be seen as a one-hit wonder. Akoya's off to a good start and growing strong. Moa, look, early reaction is pretty good. But we want to be seen as business people who can grow brands offshore, not just people who had a bit of fun with the vodka, So it's important that we string together a few success stories.
Tell us a bit about the model you're using, because this is something of a corporate pipeline, I guess, that you've developed, where you take the businesses and you grow them, and then you IPO them. This is the third one. So you've almost become something like an incubator.
Yeah, possibly. So yeah, you're right, Andrew. What we do is we get involved in probably an established business, like Akoya was established. It was commercialised. We come in with capital and skill and help grow, take a pretty reasonable stake. And before we list it, we spend at least 2 to 3 years in there doing a lot of work before we get it to the point where we're ready to step out onto the global stage with capital and really grow it. We're now doing that with Moa. I think we could consider more. We're only really limited by capital, and there's 3 people in the bakery who take quite hands-on executive roles in those businesses. Myself, Steve, and Grant. We're probably only really limited by our ability to make sure we're across those businesses.
Because you've effectively become a private incubator, sort of like what the Icehouse is doing, except you're doing it perhaps in a more streamlined fashion.
Yeah, look, we are similar. I guess we are an incubator, and the term bakery refers to baking small businesses into big businesses, and that is our mode of operation for sure.
What's your vision for a brand like Moa over time?
Look, we have a really clear vision for Moa. We do want to create New Zealand's beer globally. So pretty much every country in the world has its own beer. Corona has Mexico. Mexico has Corona. You tie the two pretty strongly together. Australia Foster's, India Kingfisher. Pretty much every country you go around the world and name has a beer. New Zealand doesn't. We think it needs to be a very New Zealand story to the beer. Moa has that. We think it needs long shelf life. Bottle conditioning gives that. It needs to be quality, so you can send it around the world and still have a margin tree. So it needs to be super premium. Moa does that. So we think we've got all the founding principles right to create that beer brand globally for New Zealand. And that's not a short-term, quick flick type deal. Okay, that's going to take a lot of time, a lot of energy, some money, and to build those credentials is going to take a number of years.
Steinlager did try it, though, and it didn't really work. So what were some of the mistakes that you observed, and what won't you be copying?
Well, Steinlager did pretty well on a number of occasions. I mean, they had that years ago. They had that brilliant campaign, "They're drinking our beer here." But it worked really well in New Zealand. They did start selling reasonable amounts, particularly in the US, but the challenge they always had was a German name for a beer from New Zealand. And the second challenge I think they had, if they were honest with themselves, they had a real focus and investment and awareness of Australia and New Zealand as key markets. So the US or the UK or wherever was always kind of a secondary focus for them, whereas us it's the reverse. You know, the US is a big part of our focus.
So do you see yourself eventually, being up there alongside Steinlager Pure, that it has that degree of consumer recognition and access, or is it always going to be sort of the Cloudy Bay of the wine sector?
Well, I prefer the Cloudy Bay analogy better of those. However, we do want broad consumer recognition and pickup, and I think the market is trading up. So, years and years ago, we were all drinking beer just out of quart bottles or jugs, and then we traded up to little green bottles from Belgium and Holland or wherever, and I think we're ready to actually move up a notch again now to pilsners, to IPAs, styles of beer and production techniques which Moa can deliver on.
There's also an expectation that you keep kind of disrupting the brand internally, adding new flavours, doing new things. Is that also part of the strategy here as well?
Well, I think you do need to keep the brand fresh and relevant, absolutely, but you got to be careful you don't do too much of that and then you lose your focus. So you don't want too many SKUs that you're going to confuse the consumer and potentially yourselves. You want to be pretty clear on what your offering is.
Given you've done vodka, candles, beer, what's next on the horizon for you?
Look, right now that's enough. We're pretty consumed with Trilogy and Accoya. That's going very well. It's getting to be a reasonable size now, and Moa is a big part of it. We also have Dorchester, which is a finance company which we got involved in and pulled out a moratorium and put some capital into and got it back on its feet. So those three key businesses we're pretty comfortable with right now.
Tell us what about the way you're reading the market at the moment, particularly around the growth of businesses, because that's obviously something you've had a chance to observe and take a look at. How are we performing generally in that entrepreneurial space right now?
Look, I think at a conceptual level, even at an angel level, those first steps of new businesses, I think New Zealand's quite healthy. We get a lot of people, approach us. We'd love to get more involved in stuff, but we just physically can't. But we see a lot of cool stuff, that as a New Zealander you're very proud of, happening at that level. The challenges start post that. Those are kind of often the honeymoon days. Businesses get commercialised. They get founding support or potentially angel support from friends and family. But businesses invariably need some big chunks of capital post them to really start commercialising them, especially if they have offshore aspirations. And that's where there's a bit of a kind of a void in the New Zealand landscape, which is one of the reasons we kind of go straight from those early angel days straight to listing, because there isn't an active VC market. There isn't really an active private equity market. So you kind of got to go straight from step 1 to 5 in one huge leap in New Zealand. That's quite challenging and daunting for some people.
So you almost need an incubator at the mid-maturity level of the market. I mean, not as much an incubator, but it's something that actually takes them through to that next phase.
I think so. You do, and it's not just capital, and it's capital and kind of some adult supervision, as I like to call it. When I first met Grant, I thought I knew who invested in 42 Below. I thought I knew everything about running all aspects of the business. Most founders do, and they have a very clear vision for their brand. But you do need a broad set of skills. You do need someone who's got a few runs on the board, and you do need capital. And so those are the things that we're struggling with in our kind of economic, our economic kind of growth of some of these businesses.
And just finally, in the technology space at the moment, 50% of New Zealanders now have smartphones. I see it's the same figure in America. Fastest take up of a technology probably in the last century. Yeah. Are we embracing that enough, do you think?
I hope so. We should. And technology offers fantastic business models. I wouldn't say it's my particular sweet spot from a business point of view, but if you look at Xero, Diligent, just amazing examples, and the business model you can create in the online world and kind of the mobile world is fantastic. So I think there's a pretty buoyant culture there. And I think, as a business community, we should make sure we've got a big emphasis going into technology.
May get a mower app.
Of course, I'll show you my mower app. I've got one on my phone. Most apps are on the front of the phone, right? This mower app is actually on the back of the phone. It's a bottle opener.
Well, Jeff, the listing, of course, is getting close, and this is another step for Moa. And I suppose the next step is global domination.
It is, and build a large brewery rather quickly too.